Imagine being so underestimated that your enemies don't even bother to study your tactics. Picture a galaxy where advanced civilizations look at humanity and see nothing more than primitive barbarians with crude weapons and outdated strategies. They see our simple projectile weapons, our basic armor, our seemingly chaotic military structure, and they laugh. But what happens when these same laughing aliens discover that humans have turned warfare into an art form? What occurs when they realize that our primitive methods have been refined through thousands of years of constant conflict? When they understand that every human soldier carries the genetic memory of survival against impossible odds? The Galactic Council learned this lesson the hard way. They discovered that when you push humans into a corner, when you threaten everything they hold dear, something awakens. Something that has been sleeping since we first picked up sticks and stones to defend our caves. Something that turns ordinary men and women into legends. This is the story of how humanity's greatest weakness became our most terrifying strength. This is the story of how the galaxy learned to fear the species they once mocked. This is the story of human soldiers who showed the universe what true warriors look like. Welcome to the war that changed everything. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with muted conversation as representatives from dozens of species took their seats. High above the crystalline floor, holographic displays showed rotating images of various worlds, trade routes, and military installations. The air itself seemed to shimmer with advanced technology, from the gravity manipulators that kept everyone comfortable regardless of their home world's conditions, to the universal translators that made communication seamless across countless languages. Ambassador Zyxtala of the Hegemony adjusted her 6 arms nervously as she reviewed her notes one final time. As the Council's primary military advisor, she had been tasked with presenting the threat assessment for the newest species to achieve faster-than-light travel. The humans of Earth had recently made contact, and their application for Council membership had been fast-tracked due to their rapid technological advancement. The session will now come to order, announced High Counselor Veltar, his massive form casting shadows across the assembly despite the carefully controlled lighting. The ancient being's 3 eyes swept across the gathered representatives, each one representing civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel for millennia. We are here to discuss the military evaluation of species designation. Human, from the 3rd planet of System Sol, Veltar continued, his voice carrying the weight of authority that came from leading the most powerful alliance in known space. Ambassador Zyxtala will present her findings. The Hegemony representative stood gracefully, her chitinous exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. As the holographic displays shifted to show images of Earth and its inhabitants, a subtle wave of amusement seemed to ripple through the assembly. Honored counselors, the Zyxtala began. After extensive observation and analysis, I must report that the humans present no significant military threat to any council member. She gestured toward the displays, which now showed human soldiers in various combat situations. Their technology is primitive by our standards, relying heavily on chemical-based projectile weapons and crude armor systems. A series of chuckles echoed through the chamber as the images showed human tanks, aircraft, and ships. To beings who had mastered energy weapons, force fields, and matter manipulation, the human military looked almost comically outdated. Their organizational structure is equally primitive, the Zyxtala continued, warming to her subject. Unlike our unified command systems, humans operate under dozens of separate military forces, often in competition or outright conflict with each other. They seem incapable of presenting a unified front even against common threats. Representative Quindar of the Maritime Coalition raised one of his tentacles in a gesture of inquiry. What of their spacefaring capabilities? Surely any species that achieves faster-than-light travel must possess some technological sophistication. Indeed, they do, Zyxtala acknowledged. However, their space vessels are essentially modified versions of their atmospheric craft, with life support systems bolted on as an afterthought. Their weapons are kinetic projectiles and primitive missiles. No energy shields, no quantum disruptors, no temporal manipulation devices. It's almost charming in its simplicity. The laughter that followed was not malicious, but rather the indulgent amusement of adults watching children play with toy soldiers. These beings had fought wars across star systems, commanded fleets that could sterilize planets, and wielded weapons that could tear holes in reality itself. The idea that humans posed any kind of threat seemed genuinely absurd. "What about their individual capabilities?" asked Counselor Thekma, her crystalline form refracting light in complex patterns. "Surely there must be some explanation for their rapid advancement." Zywixtala nodded, bringing up new displays showing human physiology and psychology profiles. Humans are indeed remarkable in their adaptability and resilience. They evolved on a death world by galactic standards, with extreme weather variations, dangerous predators, and frequent natural disasters. This has made them exceptionally hardy and resourceful. The displays showed humans operating in environments that would challenge many other species, from Arctic wastelands to scorching deserts. Images of humans climbing impossible peaks, diving to crushing ocean depths, and surviving in conditions that would kill most civilized beings flashed across the screens. However, Zywixtala continued, this very adaptability is also their weakness. They lack specialization. While they can function in many environments, they excel in none. Their physical capabilities are mediocre compared to species bred for specific purposes. Their technology, while functional, lacks the elegance and efficiency we have come to expect from true stellar civilizations. Ambassador Kethval of the warrior clans leaned forward, his scarred hide telling stories of countless battles. What of their combat experience? A species' military worth often lies not in their technology, but in their warrior spirit. This is perhaps their most significant limitation, Zywixtala replied, her voice carrying a note of what might have been pity. Humans have never fought a true interstellar war. Their conflicts have been limited to their single planet, often over trivial resources or ideological differences. They have no experience with the scale and complexity of galactic warfare. She gestured to new images showing human conflicts throughout history. Battles with swords and spears, conflicts with primitive firearms, even their most recent wars with jets and tanks. To beings who measured their conflicts in light years and their casualties in billions, these planetary skirmishes looked like minor territorial disputes. Their largest military actions involve perhaps millions of individuals across continental areas, Zywixtala explained. They have never coordinated fleets across multiple star systems, never managed supply lines spanning dozens of worlds, never faced an enemy that could strike from dimensions beyond their comprehension. High Counselor Veltar nodded slowly, his ancient mind processing the information. And yet, they achieved faster-than-light travel in less than a century after achieving atomic power. This suggests unusual potential. True, Zywixtala agreed. They are remarkably innovative when faced with challenges. However, innovation and military prowess are different things entirely. Their rapid technological advancement was driven primarily by scientific curiosity and exploration, not military necessity. The holographic displays shifted again, showing human space exploration missions, scientific vessels, and peaceful first contact protocols. The humans appeared to approach the galaxy with wonder and excitement rather than conquest and domination. In conclusion, Zywixtala said, while humans may prove valuable allies due to their adaptability and innovation, they pose no military threat to the Council or its members. I recommend accepting their membership application with standard restrictions on military technology transfers until they demonstrate greater sophistication in galactic affairs. The vote was unanimous, not because the Council feared humanity, but because they genuinely wanted to help these energetic newcomers find their place in galactic civilization. The humans seemed like enthusiastic children who had just learned to walk, eager to explore but clearly needing guidance and protection. As the session concluded and representatives began filing out, casual conversations echoed through the chamber. The general consensus was clear. Humans were fascinating, potentially useful, but ultimately harmless. Their primitive weapons and chaotic organization made them appear more like a slightly advanced planetary militia than a true stellar military force. Representative Mordak of the Synthetic Collective paused in his departure to address a small group of colleagues. "Did you see their projectile weapons?" he asked, his artificial vocal cords producing sounds resembling laughter. "They still use chemical explosions to propel metal fragments. It's like watching someone try to fight a grav tank with a bow and arrow." "At least they've mastered fire," replied Ambassador Trillax of the Psionic Dominion, her mental emanations conveying amusement to those sensitive enough to detect them. "Give them a few centuries of proper guidance, and they might even develop basic energy weapons." The conversation continued as the representatives dispersed to their various ships and accommodations. None of them bothered to request additional intelligence on human military capabilities. Why would they? The assessment was clear, comprehensive, and conducted by the galaxy's premier military analyst. What they didn't know, what their sophisticated sensors and careful observations had failed to detect, was that humanity's true strength had never been in their technology or their organization. Their strength lay in something far more primitive and far more dangerous than any weapon system or military doctrine. Deep in the files of human military history, buried in countless reports that the Galactic Intelligence Services had deemed irrelevant due to their primitive nature, were records of what humans were capable of when pushed to their limits. Stories of individuals who refused to surrender against impossible odds, of last stands that became legendary, of victories snatched from the jaws of certain defeat through sheer determination and tactical brilliance. The Council had seen human tanks and jets, human rifles and missiles. They had analyzed human command structures and training protocols. What they had not seen was a human soldier with his back to the wall, protecting something he loved more than his own life. They had not seen what happened when humans stopped fighting for territory or resources or ideology, and started fighting for survival itself. As the last of the Council members departed and the Great Hall fell silent, the holographic displays automatically cycled through their default programming, showing the peaceful worlds of the galactic community. Beautiful planets with established civilizations, each one protected by the might of the Council's combined fleets. None of those displays showed the growing shadow at the edge of Council space, where something ancient and hungry had begun to stir. None of them revealed the intelligence reports that were even now filtering in from the frontier worlds, speaking of ship disappearances and communication blackouts. The Council had just finished laughing at Earth's primitive forces, completely unaware that those same forces were about to become the only thing standing between civilization and the darkness that was coming for them all. In the depths of space, beyond the reach of Council sensors, predators that had slumbered for eons were beginning to wake. They had done this before, countless times across the galaxy's history. They would emerge from the void between stars, consume everything in their path, and then retreat to sleep once more, leaving behind only empty worlds and scattered debris. They had faced the galaxy's greatest civilizations and emerged victorious every time. They had destroyed empires that spanned thousands of worlds, reduced proud species to extinction, and turned entire sectors into lifeless wastelands. But they had never faced humans before. The irony was perfect and terrible. At the exact moment when the Galactic Council was dismissing humanity as a military nonentity, the greatest threat in galactic history was preparing to test that assessment in the most brutal way possible. The laughter was about to stop. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in chaos. Representatives arrived in various states of distress, their usual composed demeanor shattered by the reports flooding in from the Outer Rim territories. The Great Hall, which had been filled with laughter just weeks before, now resonated with urgent whispers and panicked communications. High Counselor Veltar's massive form dominated the center of the chamber, but, for the first time in living memory, the ancient being appeared genuinely disturbed. His three eyes, usually calm and authoritative, now darted between the incoming reports and the assembled representatives with barely concealed anxiety. "The situation has deteriorated rapidly," Veltar announced, his voice carrying none of its usual measured confidence. "In the past 72 hours, we have lost contact with 17 systems along the Outer Rim. The last transmissions from these locations were disturbing. The holographic displays that had recently shown peaceful human settlements now projected images of devastation that defied comprehension. Entire planets stripped bare of life, space stations reduced to twisted metal, and massive ships floating dead in the void like discarded toys. Ambassador Zyxthala, her confidence from the previous session completely evaporated, stood to address the assembly. Honored counselors, our analysis indicates that we are facing an entity we have not encountered in over 10,000 years. Ancient records speak of the void spawn, though many believe them to be mythical. The chamber fell silent except for the soft humming of life support systems and the occasional click of translation devices. Even species that had never heard the name somehow understood its significance, as if some genetic memory of absolute terror had been awakened. The void spawn, Zyxthala continued, her voice barely steady, are described in our oldest archives as creatures that exist in the space between dimensions. They emerge periodically to feed on the life force of entire civilizations, then retreat to their realm to digest their harvest before returning to consume more. Representative Quindar's tentacles writhed with anxiety as he accessed his species' historical databases. The Maritime Coalition's records speak of them as well. They call them the Silence Bringers, entities that leave nothing but empty space in their wake. Our ancestors fled across 3 galaxy arms to escape them. All our civilizations have legends about them, added Counselor Thekma, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. The Great Devouring, the Time of Darkness, the Endless Hunger. We thought they were myths designed to frighten children. Veltar gestured toward the displays, which now showed real-time footage from the latest attack. The images were almost impossible to process. Creatures that seemed to be made of living shadow flowed across planetary surfaces like a tide of destruction. They moved with purpose and intelligence, systematically harvesting every form of life they encountered. Our most advanced fleets have engaged them 3 times, Veltar reported grimly. The results have been catastrophic. The hegemony's 3rd fleet, 50,000 of our most advanced vessels, managed to destroy perhaps a dozen enemy units before being completely overwhelmed. The mathematics were horrifying. The hegemony's 3rd fleet could have conquered most stellar civilizations single-handedly, yet they had barely scratched these entities before being annihilated. How many are we facing? Asked Ambassador Kethval, his warrior instincts demanding tactical information even in the face of hopelessness. Unknown, Zyxthala replied. Our sensors cannot accurately count them. They exist partially outside normal space-time, making detection extremely difficult. Conservative estimates suggest millions, possibly billions of individual entities. A collective shudder ran through the assembly. Beings who measured their own populations in trillions suddenly felt very small and very mortal. What about evacuation? Suggested Representative Mordak. We could begin systematic withdrawal from threatened systems, consolidate our forces around the core worlds. To what end? Veltar asked sadly. According to the archives, they have never been successfully fought. Every civilization that encountered them was eventually consumed. Evacuation only delays the inevitable. The chamber erupted in panicked discussions as representatives began calculating how long their homeworlds had before the expanding wave of destruction reached them. Some species began making desperate plans for deep space evacuation, while others spoke of last stands and glorious defeats. It was in this moment of absolute despair that an unexpected voice cut through the chaos. If I may interrupt. The voice was calm, measured, and spoke in the standard galactic trade language with only a slight accent. All eyes turned to see a human figure standing in the observers section, an area typically reserved for junior diplomats and clerks. Who dares speak without recognition? Demanded Counselor Thekma, her distress making her unusually sharp. The human stepped forward into the light, revealing a middle-aged man in a simple uniform that bore no resemblance to the elaborate ceremonial garb worn by other representatives. His hair was gray, his face was lined with what might have been scars or simply the marks of a hard life, and his eyes held something that was rare in the galactic community, the look of someone who had seen real combat and survived. Colonel Marcus Stone, United Earth Defense Force, the human said simply. I've been serving as military liaison for our delegation, though I understand most of you consider that position somewhat redundant. Uncomfortable chuckles echoed through the chamber as several representatives recalled their recent amusement at human military capabilities. With respect, Colonel, Ambassador Zwiaxthalis said, not unkindly. This is a discussion for senior military commanders. The threat we're facing requires resources and experience far beyond anything your people have encountered. Perhaps, Stone replied, his tone remaining respectful but firm. However, I've been reviewing the data on these void spawn, and I believe there may be some factors you haven't considered. Such as, Veltar asked, more out of courtesy than genuine interest. Stone activated a small device, and holographic displays appeared around him, showing human military history. The images were crude compared to the Council's technology, but they carried an undeniable impact. You're correct that we've never fought an interstellar war, Stone began. But we have fought something else. We've spent our entire recorded history fighting enemies that outnumbered us, that had better technology, that seemed impossible to defeat. The displays showed human soldiers throughout history, ancient warriors facing overwhelming odds, defenders of cities under siege, small units holding positions against vastly superior forces. The images were primitive, but the determination in the faces was unmistakable. Every war we've ever fought has been against superior numbers, Stone continued. Every victory we've achieved has been through tactics, determination, and the refusal to surrender even when logic demanded it. Representative Quindar's tentacles swayed dismissively. With respect, Colonel, individual courage is admirable, but it cannot overcome the kind of technological disparity we're facing. These entities exist partially outside normal space-time. They're immune to most of our weapons. They regenerate damage faster than we can inflict it, and they coordinate across distances that should make communication impossible. You're absolutely right, Stone agreed, surprising everyone. Which is why conventional military thinking won't work against them. But there's something about these void spawn that might be the key to fighting them. He gestured to the tactical displays showing the entities in action. Look at their behavior patterns. They're not random. They're following specific protocols, almost like a military operation. They hit population centers first, then industrial sites, then agricultural areas. It's systematic, efficient, and predictable. Predictable? Zwiaxthala asked, her analytical mind engaging despite her skepticism. They're acting like an invasion force, Stone explained, which means they have objectives, supply lines of sorts, and, most importantly, they have limitations. No military force, no matter how advanced, is truly unlimited. Even if that's true, Counselor Thekma interjected, how does that help us? We still can't match their firepower or their numbers. Stone smiled grimly. Because we don't have to match them. We just have to make their objectives too expensive to achieve. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. What the human was suggesting went against every principle of galactic military doctrine, which emphasized overwhelming technological superiority and decisive battles. You're talking about guerrilla warfare, Veltar said slowly, his ancient mind recognizing the concept from historical studies. Hit and run tactics, infrastructure denial, asymmetric engagement. Exactly, Stone confirmed. These entities are used to fighting civilizations like yours, no offense intended. Beings who value life, who try to preserve their infrastructure, who engage in honorable combat. But humans learned long ago that sometimes honor is a luxury you can't afford. The displays around Stone shifted to show human conflicts where smaller forces had defeated larger ones through unconventional tactics. Guerrilla campaigns that lasted for decades, urban warfare that turned entire cities into mazes of death, and desperate last stands that became victories through sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. We're talking about taking a knife to a gunfight, Stone continued. But we're very, very good with knives. And sometimes, when your enemy thinks they're invincible, they don't watch out for the knife. Ambassador Kethval, his warrior heritage responding to something in Stone's tone, leaned forward intently. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that we stop trying to fight them like a galactic civilization and start fighting them like humans, Stone replied. We make every world they want cost them more than it's worth. We turn every battle into a nightmare that they remember. We show them that there are worse things than death. And what might those be? Asked Representative Mordak, his synthetic nature making him genuinely curious about organic psychology. Stone's smile was not pleasant. Having to fight an enemy that refuses to stay dead, that learns from every defeat, and that gets angrier every time you hurt them. We're very good at being that kind of enemy. The chamber remained silent as the assembled representatives processed this radical shift in thinking. Everything in their civilized nature recoiled from what the human was suggesting. It was barbaric, primitive, and completely contrary to their preferred methods of warfare. It was also, they were beginning to realize, possibly their only hope. The council would need to approve any military action, Veltar said carefully. And, frankly, the idea of adopting such aggressive tactics is difficult for many of our member species to accept. I understand, Stone replied. But, with respect, Counselor, you asked me here because your civilized methods aren't working. Sometimes survival requires becoming a little uncivilized. As if summoned by his words, a new alert echoed through the chamber. The displays immediately shifted to show emergency broadcasts from the frontier. 3 more systems had gone dark in the past hour, and the rate of expansion was increasing. They're accelerating their advance, Zyaxthala observed with growing horror. At this rate, they'll reach the core worlds within months, not years. Then, you don't have time for lengthy debates, Stone said bluntly. You need to decide right now whether you want to die with dignity or live with blood on your hands. The ultimatum hung in the air like a weapon. Around the chamber, representatives of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations faced the most primitive choice in existence: adapt or die. High Counselor Veltar's 3 eyes closed briefly, and, when they opened, something fundamental had changed in his expression. Colonel Stone, he said formally, the Galactic Council hereby requests that United Earth Defense Force assume coordination of our military response to the Void Spawn threat. Accepted, Stone replied without hesitation. But understand that from this moment forward, we're not fighting a civilized war. We're fighting for survival, and survival doesn't care about your moral preferences. As alarms continued to sound, and reports of new attacks flooded in, the representatives began to realize that the laughable human military they had dismissed so casually was about to become their last hope. The real war was about to begin. 3 weeks after Colonel Stone assumed command of the Galactic Defense Forces, the Kepler Station conference room had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to its original designers. The elegant meeting space, once used for diplomatic discussions and trade negotiations, now resembled a military command bunker from humanity's most desperate wars. Maps covered every surface, marked with red zones indicating void spawn advances, blue areas showing remaining Allied positions, and a growing network of yellow markers that represented something entirely new in galactic warfare: planned strategic withdrawals and scorched Earth operations. The hegemony forces are having difficulty adjusting to the new tactics, reported Lieutenant General Sarachon, Stone's second-in-command and a veteran of Earth's most brutal conflicts. Her cybernetic arm, a souvenir from the Martian corporate wars, gestured toward a holographic display showing fleet movements around the Vortis system. They keep trying to establish defensive lines instead of implementing hit-and-run protocols. Stone nodded grimly as he studied the tactical display. Around the room, representatives from various galactic military forces sat in uncomfortable silence. These beings, accustomed to elegant strategic discussions and honorable military traditions, were struggling to adapt to humanity's approach to warfare. Admiral Kethval, Stone addressed the warrior clan representative. Your forces have been the most successful at adapting to asymmetric tactics. What's your assessment of the Vortis operation? The scarred alien warrior leaned forward, his multiple eyes focused intently on the display. My ships have successfully harassed the Void Spawn advance for 6 days, he reported. We've destroyed supply tendrils and eliminated 17 harvesting units, but the enemy continues to advance. Good, Stone said, surprising everyone. That's exactly what we want them to do. Ambassador Zyaxthala, who had been trying to understand human military thinking for weeks, spoke up with obvious frustration. Colonel, I must confess that I'm struggling to see the logic in our strategy. We're abandoning system after system, destroying our own infrastructure, and allowing the enemy to advance. How is this victory? Stone walked to the main display and highlighted the void spawn's current positions. Because they're not just advancing, Ambassador. They're following our retreat route exactly as we planned. Look at their formation. The display zoomed out to show the larger tactical picture. The void spawn forces, which had initially spread across a broad front, were now concentrated into a narrow corridor of advance, pursuing the retreating galactic forces deeper into what appeared to be friendly territory. We're not retreating, Stone explained. We're leading them into a trap. Every system we've abandoned has been carefully prepared. The industrial facilities have been rigged with delayed detonation charges. The food production centers have been poisoned. The fuel depots have been replaced with explosive decoys. But those are our own worlds, protested Representative Mordak. Billions of civilians have called those places home for generations. Evacuated civilians, Chen corrected firmly. Every non-essential person was removed before we began the withdrawal. The only beings left behind are volunteers who understand the mission. And what mission is that? Asked Counselor Thekma, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. Stone's expression hardened. To make every void spawn advance as costly as possible, and to gather intelligence on their capabilities and limitations. We're learning how they think, how they operate, and, most importantly, how they can be hurt. He gestured to a smaller display showing combat footage from recent engagements. Watch this carefully. These are recordings from our forward observation posts. The footage showed void spawn entities consuming a planetary surface, their shadowy forms flowing across the landscape like liquid darkness. But there were details that had gone unnoticed in previous observations. Notice how they prioritize targets, Stone pointed out. First population centers, then industrial facilities, then agricultural areas. But look at what they avoid. The display highlighted areas of the planet that remained untouched even as the void spawn consumed everything around them. Waste disposal sites, toxic industrial zones, areas with high radiation levels, Chen enumerated. They're selective feeders. They want clean, useful resources. More importantly, Stone continued, watch how they react to resistance. The footage shifted to show a small group of volunteer defenders engaging a void spawn harvesting unit with primitive weapons. The entity's response was immediate and overwhelming, but also telling. They don't just destroy the resistance, Stone observed. They completely sterilize the area around it. Look at the energy expenditure data. The display showed power consumption readings that made several representatives gasp in shock. The void spawn had used enough energy to destroy a small moon just to eliminate a handful of defenders with kinetic weapons. They're afraid of being hurt, Chen explained. Not physically, but they seem to have some kind of collective memory of pain. When they encounter resistance, they overreact massively. This is all very interesting, Zwiaxthala said impatiently. But how does it help us win? We still can't match their firepower, and these tactics are only slowing their advance, not stopping it. Stone walked to another display, this one showing the current positions of human military forces throughout the galaxy. The representatives were surprised to see that human ships and personnel were distributed across dozens of systems, many of them far behind the current battle lines. 3 months ago, you laughed at our primitive weapons and chaotic organization, Stone said quietly. But there's something you didn't understand about human military history. We've never won wars through superior technology or perfect organization. Then, how have you won? Asked Admiral Kethfall, genuine curiosity in his voice. Through superior motivation and inferior ethics, Stone replied bluntly. When we fight, we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to make the enemy wish they'd never heard of us. He activated a new display showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with the current void spawn positions marked in red. But now there were thousands of tiny blue markers scattered throughout the infected zones. While you've been focusing on the main advance, we've been infiltrating human teams behind enemy lines, Stone explained. Small groups, heavily armed, with very specific missions. What kind of missions? Veltar asked, though his tone suggested he already suspected the answer. Terror missions, Chen said without apology. We're hunting their command structures, sabotaging their operations, and generally making their lives as miserable as possible. The display showed real-time footage from one such operation. A team of human soldiers in advanced armor was moving through the ruins of a consumed city, their weapons trained on something off-screen. The quality was poor, transmitted through layers of subspace interference, but the audio was clear enough. "Contact," came a calm voice through the static. "Multiple entities, harvesting pattern Delta. Implementing Protocol 7. What followed was a masterpiece of controlled violence. The human team didn't try to engage the void spawn directly. Instead, they systematically destroyed the infrastructure the entities were trying to harvest, turned their own collected resources into weapons against them, and created a cascading series of disasters that forced the void spawn to expend massive amounts of energy just to maintain their position. The beautiful thing about terror tactics," Stone continued as the footage played, "is that they work on a psychological level. These entities may be ancient and powerful, but they're still intelligent beings. They can learn to fear. You're teaching them to fear humans specifically," realized Ambassador HFY, her analytical mind finally grasping the strategy. "Exactly," Stone confirmed. "Every time they encounter human forces, something goes horribly wrong for them. Their harvesting operations fail, their resources get contaminated, their command structures get targeted by weapons they can't defend against." Admiral Kethval studied the tactical displays with growing appreciation. "You're not trying to stop the invasion. You're trying to make the invasion cost more than the void spawn are willing to pay. Now you're beginning to understand," Chen said approvingly. "Humans learned a long time ago that you don't have to be stronger than your enemy. You just have to be more trouble than you're worth." The conference room fell silent as the assembled representatives processed the implications of what they were hearing. The human strategy was working, but it required a level of ruthlessness that challenged everything their civilized society stood for. "There's something else," Stone said, his voice taking on a darker tone. "Our intelligence teams have discovered something about the void spawn that changes the entire nature of this conflict." He activated another display, this one showing energy signatures and biological analyses that had been collected from battlefield remnants. "They're not just feeding on resources," Stone explained. "They're feeding on fear, on despair, on the psychological trauma of their victims. The more hopeless their enemies become, the stronger the void spawn get. Which is why previous galactic civilizations always lost," Chen continued. "They fought honorable, defensive wars, trying to protect their people and preserve their values. The more they lost, the more desperate they became, and the more powerful their enemies grew. But humans," Stone said with a predatory smile, "have never been particularly interested in fighting honorable wars. We prefer to win." He gestured to the battlefield reports streaming in from across the galaxy. "Every one of our operations is designed to cause maximum psychological damage to the enemy. We're not just fighting them. We're teaching them that humans are something to be afraid of." The void spawn expected to face another advanced civilization that would fight defensively and eventually collapse under pressure, Chen explained. Instead, they're facing an enemy that gets more dangerous when cornered, that treats their own losses as tactical advantages, and that seems to enjoy fighting against impossible odds. Representative Mordak, his synthetic mind processing the data with mechanical precision, spoke up thoughtfully. "You're changing the psychological equation of the war. Instead of the void spawn feeding on our fear, you're making them experience fear themselves." "Precisely," Stone confirmed. "And there's one more element to our strategy that we haven't implemented yet." "Which is?" asked Veltar, though his tone suggested he was almost afraid to hear the answer. Stone walked to the center of the room and activated the main holographic display. It showed the entire galaxy, with the void spawn advance marked in red and allied forces in blue. But now there was a new element, a growing network of green markers that seemed to be converging on a specific location. "Phase 2 of our operation begins tomorrow," Stone announced. "We've spent the last 3 weeks learning everything we can about these entities, mapping their capabilities, understanding their psychology, and positioning our forces." "Positioned for what?" HFY asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "For the largest coordinated assault in galactic history," Chen replied. Every human unit in the galaxy will simultaneously strike at void spawn positions across 200 systems. Not to destroy them, but to deliver a very specific message. What message? Admiral Kethval asked, his warrior instincts responding to the implications. Stone's smile was cold and predatory. That humans don't fight wars to win battles, or capture territory, or preserve honor. We fight wars to completely destroy our enemies, and we never, ever stop until the job is finished. The assembled representatives stared at the display showing the scope of the planned operation. It was massive, coordinated across impossible distances, and designed not for victory, but for maximum psychological impact. You're trying to break their will to fight, Veltar observed. We're trying to teach them something that every species in human space learned the hard way, Stone corrected. That there are some enemies you just don't mess with, because the cost of fighting them is higher than any possible reward. As alerts began sounding and reports came in of human forces moving into position across the galaxy, the representatives began to understand that they weren't just witnessing a military operation. They were watching humanity introduce the concept of total war to an enemy that had never encountered anything like it before. The Void Spawn were about to learn why every major power in Earth's solar system had eventually decided that cooperation with humans was preferable to conflict with them. They were about to learn what it meant to fight an enemy that had turned warfare into an art form, and took personal pride in being very, very good at it. The coordinated assault began at 0300 Galactic Standard Time across 200 star systems simultaneously. For the first time in their ancient existence, the Void Spawn faced an enemy that struck from everywhere at once, with no regard for conventional military wisdom or their own safety. On the bridge of the UES Indomitable, Colonel Stone watched as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. The massive holographic display showed a three-dimensional map of the conflict zone, with thousands of engagement markers appearing and disappearing in real time as human forces executed their missions. Strike Team Alpha 7 reports successful demolition of the harvesting complex on Kepler 442b, reported Communications Officer Liu, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding them. Estimated enemy losses, 43 harvesting units, and 1 command node. Strike Team Gamma 12 has successfully contaminated the atmospheric processors on New Geneva, came another report. Void Spawn forces are retreating from the system due to environmental toxicity. Delta 5 reports mission complete on Sanctuary, added another voice. The planetary defense grid has been reprogrammed to fire on any Void Spawn vessels attempting to enter orbit. Stone nodded grimly as each report came in. This wasn't warfare as the galactic community understood it. This was systematic destruction of everything the enemy wanted, combined with the creation of hazards that would persist long after the human forces had moved on. Sir, Lieutenant General Chun called from her position at the tactical console, we're receiving some interesting communications from Void Spawn positions. Put them on speakers, Stone ordered. What came through the communication system was unlike anything the galactic forces had heard from the enemy before. Instead of the usual silence or occasional hunting calls, there were sounds that could only be described as confusion, frustration, and perhaps even fear. They're trying to communicate with each other across multiple systems simultaneously, Chin observed, analyzing the signal patterns. These readings suggest they're attempting to coordinate a response to our attacks, but they can't seem to predict where we'll strike next. The reason for their confusion was visible on the tactical display. Human forces weren't following any conventional pattern of attack. They struck valuable targets and worthless ones with equal intensity, hit heavily defended positions, and abandoned outposts without discrimination, and seemed to take particular pleasure in destroying things the Void Spawn had already claimed. Strike Team Echo 9 reports successful completion of the Welcome Wagon protocol on Vortis Prime. Came another communication. Stone allowed himself a rare smile. The Welcome Wagon protocol was perhaps the most psychologically devastating tactic in the human arsenal. When the Void Spawn captured a world and began establishing their harvesting operations, human teams would sneak back onto the planet and leave surprises for them. Booby traps that turned harvested resources into weapons. Computer viruses that corrupted their data collection systems. biological agents that made collected organic matter unsuitable for consumption. And, in some cases, simple messages left where the entities would find them, written in their own captured territory. What did Echo 9 leave for them this time? Chen asked with professional curiosity. A complete chemical analysis of every toxin that humans have ever developed, along with detailed instructions on how to synthesize them from common planetary resources, Stone replied. Plus a note explaining that any world they capture will eventually be contaminated with these compounds. The psychological impact was immediate. Across the tactical display, void spawn forces could be seen withdrawing from recently captured worlds, apparently unwilling to risk consuming poisoned resources. But the most significant development came from an unexpected source. Sir, reported Ensign Martinez from the long-range communication station, we're receiving a transmission on the emergency diplomatic frequency. It's from the void spawn. The bridge fell silent. In all the galactic records, there had never been any mention of the void spawn attempting to communicate with their prey. Put it through, Stone ordered. The voice that emerged from the speakers was unlike anything they had heard before. It seemed to echo with the voices of multiple beings speaking in unison, creating harmonics that were both beautiful and deeply unsettling. Human forces, the voice said in perfect galactic standard. We acknowledge your communications. Stone exchanged glances with Chun before responding. This is Colonel Marcus Stone, commanding United Earth Defense Force operations. I wasn't aware we had sent you any communications. Every action of your forces is communication, the voice replied. You have made your message clear. We wish to discuss terms. The implications hit everyone on the bridge simultaneously. For the first time in their recorded history, the void spawn were attempting to negotiate rather than simply consume. Terms for what? Stone asked carefully. Cessation of hostilities. We propose territorial division. You retain your current holdings. We will restrict our feeding to uninhabited systems. Stone looked around the bridge at his officers, seeing his own thoughts reflected in their expressions. This was unprecedented, but it was also exactly what they had hoped to achieve. I need to consult with the Galactic Council before responding to any proposals, Stone said diplomatically. Understood. We will maintain current positions and await your response. However, we must note that continued attacks by your forces will be interpreted as rejection of negotiation. The communication ended, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. They're afraid, Chen said wonderingly. We actually made them afraid. Stone was already activating the emergency communication system to contact the Galactic Council. Give me High Counselor Veltar immediately, and patch in all senior military commanders. Within minutes, the main display showed the faces of galactic leaders from across known space. The expressions ranged from shock to amazement to something approaching awe. Colonel Stone, High Counselor Veltar said without preamble, we have all received copies of the Void Spawn communication. This is unprecedented. It's also potentially a trap, warned Admiral Kethfall. These entities have been consuming civilizations for eons. Why would they suddenly become reasonable? Because, Stone replied, we're the first enemy they've ever faced that costs them more than they can gain by fighting us. Look at the tactical reports. The display shifted to show the results of the coordinated assault. The numbers were staggering. In less than 6 hours, human forces had destroyed or contaminated resources equivalent to what the void spawn typically harvested from entire star systems. More importantly, added Shun, we've poisoned dozens of worlds they had already captured, turned their own harvesting infrastructure against them, and demonstrated that we can strike anywhere in their territory at any time. But have we actually weakened them significantly? Asked Ambassador Zyxthala. Or have we simply annoyed them into talking? Stone highlighted specific data from the battle reports. Our intelligence indicates that the void spawn operate on a resource calculation basis. They expand when the energy cost of expansion is less than the energy gained from conquest. We've reversed that equation. Every world they take now comes with the guarantee that human forces will eventually contaminate it, Chen explained. Every harvesting operation they establish becomes a potential target for sabotage. Every advance they make brings them into contact with an enemy that seems to enjoy making their lives miserable. Representative Mordak, processing the data with synthetic precision, spoke up. The mathematics are clear. If humans can maintain this level of harassment indefinitely, the void spawn will eventually be operating at an energy deficit. Can we maintain this level of operations? Veltar asked practically. For decades, if necessary, Stone replied without hesitation. This is what human military forces were designed to do. We've been fighting asymmetric warfare for our entire history. Our soldiers are trained for extended operations behind enemy lines. Our logistics systems are built to function under constant threat, and our command structure is designed to operate independently when cut off from higher authority. Moreover, Chen added, our forces are entirely volunteer. Every human in this operation understands that they're fighting for the survival of galactic civilization. That kind of motivation doesn't fade. The assembled representatives absorbed this information with varying degrees of comprehension. Species that had fought wars for territorial expansion or resource acquisition struggled to understand an enemy that fought purely to deny victory to their opponents. So what do you recommend? Veltar asked finally. Stone considered the question carefully. I recommend we negotiate, but from a position of strength. We make it clear that the ceasefire is conditional on their complete withdrawal from all previously inhabited systems, and that any resumption of hostilities will result in an escalated campaign of systematic destruction. And if they refuse? Asked Admiral Kethfall. Then, we continue the current operations until they change their minds, Stone replied simply. We have the strategic advantage now. They're afraid of us, and fear is the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. But, Colonel, protested Ambassador Zwaixthala, surely you don't intend to maintain this level of aggression indefinitely? The psychological strain on your forces must be enormous. Stone's expression hardened. Ambassador, you're thinking like a civilized being who values peace and stability. Human soldiers don't fight despite the psychological strain. We fight because of it. We're not trying to get back to normal. This is normal for us. The truth of that statement settled over the assembly like a weight. These beings had spent weeks watching human forces operate, and they were beginning to understand that what they had witnessed wasn't humans adapting to wartime conditions. It was humans finally being allowed to do what they had been bred and trained for across millennia of constant conflict. Very well, Veltar said finally. Colonel Stone, you are authorized to enter into negotiations with the void spawn entities. The Council grants you full diplomatic authority to reach whatever agreement you deem necessary for the security of galactic civilization. Understood, Stone replied. But I want to make something clear to everyone on this call. If we do reach an agreement, it will only hold as long as the void spawn believe that breaking it would be more costly than maintaining it. Meaning? Asked Counselor Thekma. Meaning that human forces will need to maintain a permanent presence throughout the galaxy, Chin explained. Not to fight wars, but to serve as a reminder of what happens to species that threaten galactic civilization. You're proposing to become the galaxy's permanent military deterrent, Veltar observed. We're proposing to do what we've always done, Stone corrected. Protect civilization from those who would destroy it. The only difference is that now the scope includes the entire galaxy instead of just one planet. As the communication ended and the senior staff began implementing the ceasefire protocols, reports continued to flow in from across the galaxy. Human forces were maintaining their positions, but they weren't standing down. They were making it clear that the offer to negotiate was exactly that, an offer, not a surrender. On 1,000 worlds throughout void spawn territory, human soldiers maintained their watch. They had taught the galaxy's greatest predators to fear, and now they would teach them to respect the boundaries that fear created. The void spawn had learned the most important lesson in galactic politics. There were some species you negotiated with rather than fought, not because you couldn't defeat them, but because the cost of defeating them was higher than any possible victory. They had learned what every other major power in human space had eventually understood. Humans were much better as allies than as enemies. The galaxy would never again make the mistake of laughing at Earth's forces. 6 months after the Void Spawn Accords were signed, the Galactic Council convened for its first regular session since the crisis began. The Great Hall had been rebuilt and expanded, with new sections added to accommodate the dramatic changes in galactic politics that had emerged from humanity's successful defense campaign. High Counselor Veltar called the session to order, but The atmosphere was markedly different from the panicked emergency meetings that had dominated the recent past. There was a new confidence in the assembly, but also an underlying wariness that spoke to how profoundly the recent events had changed everyone's understanding of military power and political necessity. The first item on our agenda, Veltar announced, is the formal presentation of the Galactic Defense Force organizational structure, as proposed by the Terran Military Command. Colonel Stone, now bearing the insignia of Supreme Commander of Galactic Defense Forces, stood to address the assembly. The promotion had been unanimous among council members, though some had clearly struggled with the implications of placing the galaxy's military defense in human hands. Honored counselors, Stone began. 6 months ago, you laughed at our primitive weapons and chaotic organization. Today, I want to show you what we've built together. The holographic displays activated to show a three-dimensional map of the galaxy that bore little resemblance to the territorial divisions that had existed before the Void Spawn crisis. Instead of the traditional boundaries between different species' home systems, there was now a complex network of defensive zones, rapid response corridors, and what the humans had termed deterrent stations. The Galactic Defense Force now consists of 2.3 million active personnel from 47 different species, Stone reported. However, the organizational structure follows human military doctrine, emphasizing flexibility, rapid deployment, and asymmetric capabilities. Ambassador Zyax Thala, who had become something of an expert on human military thinking during the crisis, raised one of her 6 arms to request recognition. Commander, could you explain how this structure differs from traditional galactic military organization? Certainly, Stone replied, highlighting different sections of the display. Traditional galactic forces were built around the concept of territorial defense using technological superiority. Large fleets defending specific systems, with clear command hierarchies and predictable deployment patterns. The new structure is built around the concept of distributed deterrence, added Lieutenant General Chan, who now served as Deputy Commander for Special Operations. We maintain small, highly mobile units throughout the galaxy, each one capable of operating independently and inflicting disproportionate damage on any threatening force. Representative Quindar's tentacles swayed with curiosity. What kind of disproportionate damage are we discussing? Stone smiled, and several representatives unconsciously shifted in their seats. They had learned to be wary of that particular expression. Every deterrent station is staffed by a mixed-species crew trained in what we call problem resolution protocols, Stone explained. When a potential threat emerges anywhere in the galaxy, the nearest station deploys a response team with the authority and capability to resolve the situation before it becomes a larger problem. Could you be more specific about these capabilities? Asked Admiral Kethfall, who had become one of humanity's strongest supporters after witnessing their tactical effectiveness. Each response team includes specialists in economic warfare, infrastructure disruption, psychological operations, and what our human colleagues refer to as creative problem-solving, Chun replied diplomatically. Counselor Thekma's crystalline form flickered with what might have been amusement. I believe they're telling us that these teams can destroy an emerging threat's economy, disable their infrastructure, break their morale, and if all else fails, simply eliminate them through unconventional methods. That's a reasonably accurate summary, Stone admitted. The important point is that potential aggressors now understand that threatening galactic peace means facing immediate, sustained, and escalating consequences that will continue until they either cease their aggressive actions or cease to exist. The chamber fell silent as representatives processed the implications. What the humans had created wasn't just a military force. It was a system of deterrence that made large-scale conflict effectively impossible. There's another aspect to this new structure that you should understand, Stone continued, activating a new display that showed recruitment and training statistics. 60% of our personnel are non-human, and they're not just support staff. Some of our most effective special operations teams are led by species whose natural abilities complement human tactical thinking. The display showed operational reports that would have been classified just months earlier. Hegemony tactical specialists using their superior analytical capabilities to plan operations. Maritime Coalition deep space operators using their natural adaptation to hostile environments for extended reconnaissance missions. Even synthetic beings from the collective serving as communication specialists and data warfare experts. You've created an integrated military force that combines human tactical doctrine with the natural abilities of every major galactic species, observed Representative Mordak. This is unprecedented in galactic history. It's also voluntary, Chen emphasized. Every member of the defense force chose to be there. We've found that beings who volunteer to protect civilization tend to be highly motivated and extremely effective. What about the void spawn? Asked Ambassador Ziyxthala. The Accords specify that they remain in designated systems beyond the galactic rim. But how do we ensure they honor the agreement? Stone's expression grew serious. Through regular reminders of the consequences of breaking it. He activated another display showing the current positions of what were euphemistically called diplomatic missions throughout void spawn territory. The reality was that these were heavily armed human teams maintaining a permanent presence in every system the entities controlled. The void spawn understand that their continued existence depends on their adherence to the Accords, Stone explained bluntly. They've seen what humans do to enemies who threaten galactic civilization, and they've decided they prefer to exist as neighbors rather than threats. And if they change their minds, pressed Veltar, then we remind them why they made that decision in the first place. Chen replied with the same calm tone she might use to discuss the weather. Representative Kethval leaned forward with obvious interest. Has there been any testing of this deterrent? 3 times, Stone confirmed. Minor incursions into prohibited systems, apparently by entities who hadn't received the message about the new arrangements. Each incursion was met with immediate response by the local deterrent team. What happened to the incursions? Asked Counselor Thekma, though her tone suggested she suspected the answer. They ceased to be incursions, Chen replied simply. The chamber remained silent for a moment as everyone absorbed the implications of that statement. Moving on to other business, Veltar said, clearly deciding that some topics were better left unexplored. We need to discuss the economic implications of the new defense structure. The cost of maintaining these forces across the galaxy is substantial. Actually, Stone said, surprising everyone. The defense force is largely self-funding at this point. How is that possible? Asked Ambassador Ziyxthala. It turns out that very few species are willing to risk conflict when they know it will result in immediate, overwhelming response, Chen explained. Piracy is virtually non-existent now. Trade disputes are resolved through negotiation rather than force, and territorial conflicts have essentially disappeared. The reduction in military spending by individual species has more than offset the cost of the defense force, added Stone. Most council members are actually saving money on security while enjoying much higher levels of protection. Additionally, Chen continued, the defense force has become remarkably efficient at resolving problems before they become expensive. When potential aggressors know that threatening galactic peace means facing human tactical doctrine combined with galactic technological capabilities, they tend to reconsider their plans. Representative Mordak accessed his databanks before speaking. The statistics are remarkable. Galactic military expenditures have decreased by 73% since the establishment of the defense force, while security incidents have decreased by 96%. The few remaining security incidents, added Admiral Kethval with obvious satisfaction, tend to be resolved very quickly. There's something else you should understand about the current situation, Stone said, activating a display that showed communication intercepts and intelligence reports. Word of what happened during the void spawn crisis has spread beyond our galaxy. We're receiving inquiries from neighboring galactic clusters about establishing mutual defense agreements. Inquiries from whom? Asked Veltar with interest. From civilizations that have been dealing with their own existential threats, Chen explained. Apparently, news that someone finally found a way to make the void spawn back down has attracted considerable attention from other beleaguered species. We're considering a proposal to establish an intergalactic defense network, Stone continued. A system that would extend our deterrent capabilities across multiple galactic clusters, ensuring that threats like the void spawn can never again threaten civilized life on such a scale. The implications were staggering. What had begun as humanity's desperate attempt to save one galaxy was evolving into something that could protect all known civilization. The proposal would require significant expansion of our forces, Chun noted, but also significant expansion of our recruitment base. There are species in other galaxies whose natural abilities would complement our existing capabilities, and the human crews would, of course, maintain their traditional role in tactical planning and problem resolution, added Stone. Ambassador Zyxthala spoke up thoughtfully. 6 months ago, we considered humans to be a minor species with primitive weapons and questionable military value. Now we're discussing making them the defenders of intergalactic civilization. Not just humans, Stone corrected. The Defense Force succeeds because it combines human tactical thinking with the diverse capabilities of every species that chooses to participate. Humans provide the strategic framework and the willingness to do whatever is necessary, but our allies provide the technological capabilities and specialized skills that make victory possible. Nevertheless, observed Counselor Thekma, it's remarkable how quickly the galaxy's perception of humanity has changed. The galaxy's perception was based on incomplete information, Chen replied. You saw our technology and our organization, but you didn't understand our psychology or our history. You thought our constant warfare was a weakness, when it was actually our greatest strength. You assumed that because we fought among ourselves, we were naturally aggressive and untrustworthy, Stone added. You didn't realize that all that fighting had taught us how to end conflicts quickly and decisively. Most importantly, Chen continued, you didn't understand that humans have never learned to accept defeat. When you're facing an existential threat, that turns out to be a very useful ally to have. As the session continued and the representatives discussed the technical details of expanding the Defense Force, the larger implications of the new galactic order became clear. The species that had once laughed at human military capabilities now looked to humanity for protection against the darkness between stars. The void spawn remained in their designated systems, carefully honoring the accords and showing no inclination to test the boundaries that had been established. Other potential threats had learned to respect the new reality of galactic politics. Civilized behavior was rewarded with trade and cooperation, while aggressive behavior was met with swift and overwhelming response. Throughout the galaxy, beings went about their daily lives in the knowledge that somewhere in the darkness, human soldiers maintained their watch. The same species that had once been dismissed as primitive barbarians now stood guard over the largest and most successful peaceful civilization in known history. The galaxy had learned many lessons during the void spawn crisis, but perhaps the most important was this. Sometimes the most effective guardians of civilization are those who understand the true cost of its loss. They had laughed at Earth's forces, but they would never make that mistake again. The laughter had been replaced by something far more valuable: respect, gratitude, and the quiet confidence that came from knowing that the darkness would never again find them unprepared. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not as conquerors or rulers, but as the guardians who ensured that civilization could flourish in safety. It was exactly the role they had been born to fill.